Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the planning part of the agenda. We will begin with development control, and this is item 12.1 from the agenda, 621122-019, proposed erection of 4 linked cabins to use as holiday lets, the Blue Ball Inn, Canterbury. This was the subject of a site visit last Friday, and this is going to be presented by Mrs. Spears.
Thank you. This application is for 4 linked cabins to be used as serviced holiday accommodation. The Blue Ball Inn is a Grade 2 listed 17th century coaching inn located on the south side of the A39 in Canterbury. The Grade 2 listed town farm cottages and the annex lie to the west of the site, and the Grade 2 star listed Church of St John lies to the north. The application site lies immediately to the rear of the inn. The land slopes steeply up to the south and is bounded to the east and south by existing hedge banks. The car park for the inn lies to the north and on the opposite side of the A39. The inn currently has 14 ensuite rooms as serviced holiday accommodation and is seeking through this application to increase this offer to 18. This is the existing site plan as it stands at the moment, and this is the proposed site plan. This shows the relationship between the existing building and the proposed units. There is a proposed footpath to the west of the units which would link to the existing steps, which themselves would be improved. Permission was previously granted in December 2022 for both planning permission and listed building consent for an extension to the southeast corner of the inn to form 4 staff rooms, staff accommodation. That, although those haven't yet been built, they are shown on this proposed plan. The original application that came in, this was the western and the northern elevations, and objections were received from the Historic Buildings Officer, the Future Landscapes Officer, the Parish Council and the National Trust on the grounds of design, harmful impact on the landscape, harmful impact on nearby heritage assets, and the Parish Council also raised concerns around sewage disposal. As a result of those objections, amendments were made to the scheme. So this is the amended design for the western elevation. You can see the step roof line has been altered to be a single contiguous roof line with green planted roof. Chimneys have been removed, the glazing has been reduced and recessed, and timber shutters are now included to reduce light spillage and glare. Again, this is now the proposed northern elevation. In addition to the other amendments, additional native species planting is proposed to the north, south and east of the proposed building to further screen the site. In response to these amended plans, the Historic Buildings Officer and Future Landscapes Officer have withdrawn their objections to the scheme, and no further comment has been received from the National Trust. The Parish Council has informed EMPA that they do not wish to make any response to the amended scheme. Again, this is the proposed eastern elevation, again showing the extent of the additional planting to screen the site. So we've got an existing long-range view from the northeast of the site looking back towards the site. You can see on the right of the picture the Church of St John. Blue Ball Inn itself is just to the left of centre, and there's an arrow pointing towards the existing hedge bank which the proposed cabins would be located behind. A proposed visualisation of the same scene has been submitted. That's what you're looking at here, showing how it is felt that the cabins will look in situ, with the green roof helping them to blend into the landscape and the additional planting screening the site. That's the current view from the application site to the north. You can see the church in the distance and you can see the car park on the far side of the A39. And that's a view east looking towards the application site, which is the hedge bank with the gap in, as it is at the moment, is the line of the rear of the proposed cabins. Okay. Let's go back one.
Thank you very much. We have one public speaker, and that is Mr. Mears, who is the applicant's agent. Mr. Mears, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. If you could just check that the microphone is on, that's it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. Yes, just to give you a little bit of background, really. So, the Blue Ball Inn is probably in it somewhere that we all know very well. Historic coaching inn. It's an iconic location. I think, like lots of businesses in the hospitality sector, it's been a really challenging time of late. You know, COVID saw pub like this having to shut, and then we had stop-start opening afterwards. As a consequence of that, following that, getting staff is very difficult for rural businesses like this, especially where they're not served by public transport. So the first task we had was to try and create additional staffing accommodation, and that's, as was referred to, was approved a small extension to the back of the hotel for 4 staff bedrooms last year. But that was really only part of the equation, because in order to sustain this business and make it viable, there is really a need to create a little bit more guest accommodation. So it's a listed building, and really the form and shape of the building doesn't lend itself to a physical extension to it. I think our feeling was that it would be much better to look at something which was a slightly separate but linked building, and the position which we've sort of suggested behind the hotel to the south is the least visible area, really. So as part of the design process, we felt that also it shouldn't look like the hotel. It should be something which is a little bit different, but also sensitive to the location. So as has been pointed out, the discussions with your officers during the process meant we've ended up with something that we feel is a sensitive proposal. So outside the building is clad in stone, has a grass roof, deep overhangs to recess the windows, but also give some protection from the weather. So we feel it's a sensitive, almost earth-sheltered building which is part of the landscape and barely visible. At the same time, that means the pub can offer something a little bit different in terms of guest accommodation, so different to the pub rooms that are there, and perhaps slightly different to other tourist offerings that are available within the park. Is that my timer? Okay.
Bring your remarks to a close, Mr. Wilson.
I will do. Okay, so really, the basis of this then, there's an opportunity to create something which enhances tourism provision within the park, but also sustains the viability of the Blue Ball Inn as a business, the jobs it represents, and promotes tourism within the park. So we hope this modest proposal will be approved on that basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Okay, members, particularly those of you that were on the site visit, if you have any comments you wish to make. However, Mrs. Chilcott.
Thank you. I wasn't quite happy with the notes from the visit, thank you. Just one question I was going to ask, and for me, you know, the design looks appealing. It's certainly something different to a lot that we've seen. It was just my, I suppose, disappointment around the disabled access. And for me, that could be extended to families, prams, etc. So for me personally, it would have been really nice to have had some more inclusive access so that anybody, should it be accepted, could actually be able to use the facilities. Thank you.
Yes, we did actually raise that point on site. However, it is a very steeply sloping site, and it would have been quite difficult, I think, to have engineered any easy access to it. However, members? Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. I was also going to raise about the disabled facilities, the fact that there aren't going to be any disabled of those 4 cabins. However, is that within the main building on the ground floor? That would be probably helpful as well. There was mention of shutters being put on the windows to help with the cut down some of the light. Although I don't think, I couldn't find any conditions on those shutters. I mean, you can't say they have to be closed at 9 o'clock every evening to shut out the light. But, and I think it probably might be a bit harsh to do that. But however, what is the benefit of saying that there are shutters to cut out the light if they don't actually have to be used?
Through you, Chair. So when we consider planning applications, it's about considering them considering all eventualities. So while the scheme has tried to mitigate by making the provision of the shelters across the windows, if you remember from the site visit, there was also reference to the fact that the windows are set back as well, and there was the clear overhang, which again was mitigation. Now, in terms of taking that further to sort of actually condition that those shutters are shut at a certain time or certain circumstances, I think it would probably fail the tests around sort of implementing planning conditions around reasonableness and enforceability. It would be quite difficult for us to be able to get out there and do something about it to stop the breach from happening. But from the report, you can see officers have considered all of those things and feel that the proposal as submitted is acceptable without those conditions.
Yes, please.
Are shutters, I noticed and also there's only 3 buildings in that area, but are shutters on the outside of buildings quite common on the park, or is it something that would normally we would have there?
Then they're not a common design feature, and in particular within that area they're not. But again, we've considered the design of the proposal and considered that the development as a whole is high quality design, and the shutters form part of that, and we think that they have an acceptable impact.
Okay. Mr. Ellicott.
Well, after the site visit, I'm afraid I will not be able to support the officer's recommendation of approval. The architects have taken great care to show the visual impact by putting the roof under an earth bank, but they've shown no visual impact of the patios to the front of these units, or the massive excavations that are going to need to be done to allow access. On our site visit, there was even a member that couldn't go up the path towards the units to see what was going on, and I think that visual impact outweighs any benefit of putting the actual building under a grass roof. As has already been commented, it is unfortunate that that site will definitely never be, no matter what you did, all-inclusive for access. We're doing a lot on the National Park to try to promote access by various groups, and to approve an application that rules out any access by disabled people, or not even disabled people, people that couldn't walk up and down the steps that are going to be needed to access these premises. And I disagree that it's attached to the original pub. There's a big bank between. It towers above the Blue Ball Inn at the back of it, and as I said, I will not be supporting this application.
Thank you, Mr. Ellicott. Mrs. Nicholson.
I think I want to fall somewhere between the different remarks that have been made so far by officers and members. No, there isn't, I think, any possibility of access for people whose mobility is not good. It's just too steep. The topography means that it isn't. Does that mean we should never allow 2-storey houses to be built without lifts?
I'm not sure that it does. Yes, absolutely there needs to be disabled access. I don't know what it is like in the rest of the hub, the listed building, which of course is a difficulty, but it would feel more appropriate to try to ensure disabled access somewhere near road level rather than up a really steep bank. I don't think that there isn't access, disabled access or limited mobility access, is enough to turn it down. But it is something that we need to note and make sure we consider properly. I think the green roof is a darn good thing. The raising of the bank to the west and the planting west and east and south, it is good. The overhang to put the windows further back, which is the best part of half a metre, I think. Metre is huge, I think, in terms of reduction of impact. No, I don't think outside shutters are common in England at all. They look like trying to pretend you're in France in general if they're beautiful, painted, pretty. I don't believe that's what is envisaged here, and this is not a traditional building on which you would not wish to see outdoor shutters. And they are going to be within that metre overhang. I need to be advised by the planning officer whether access to build them is a matter for the planning authority or the building regs people, but it seems to me that actually could be a thing which could have an impact on the landscape, because I think it's going to be darn difficult. And I don't know whether we are clear about if we do permit it, what we'll do about reinstatement of that. What was raised at the time was how will the management of the field, the rest of the field, be maintained, given that there is likely only to be access to the field on foot, because the gateway that you can get into the field now is going to be behind the cabins. I think those are questions that need answering. On the other hand, I am inclined to think that with the green roof, the change of design, the withdrawal of the windows behind the overhang and the shutters, and the topography and the really quite distant views that will look at the west-facing side. And I believe the fairly low-lying coming down to the area in front of the chalets, which is not going to be hugely visible, as you can see from the shape of the field. I think that I would feel it is acceptable when those questions have been answered. So actually I'll propose it.
I was just about to say, would anyone like to put forward a motion of any sort? Is that seconded, please, by Mr. Kravis, who wanted to speak next anyway, but perhaps if I could ask Mr. Kinsella to maybe address the questions you've just raised, Mrs. Nicholson, and then I'll ask Mr. Kravis to speak.
Forgive me, you might have to remind me on if I missed anything, but I think the main one there was regarding the impact around construction traffic and building out the development. I think it's a really fair point to make. I think in terms of the ultimate control that we have is that if we were to grant planning permission, there are clearly plans that show the confines of the development and the intervention into the site. So even if there was some temporary intervention, that would need to be replaced. Now, quite rightly, a number of you might turn around and say, well, actually, we want to manage that intervention anyway. And I think that's a very sensible suggestion. So what I would advise is if members were minded to approve the application, that an additional condition was imposed to ensure that a construction management plan was submitted to the planning authority for its agreement, so we can understand the routes they're looking to come in, the mechanisms to get to the site. Because on the site visit, there was a number of members who raised actually how you're going to access it. Now that discussion was in the arena of maintenance, but it also does apply around the construction phase, and officers can draft a suitable condition to meet those challenges. But yeah, that's it.
Are you happy to add that condition to your recommendation, Mrs. Nicholson?
Indeed, and my other question was on the maintenance of the field itself later on, and I can see a worry that the whole lot might be turned into a lawn, and mown with a lawnmower, because that might be the most convenient
But I
way.
suppose this is...
Wouldn't that require change of use of government?
I don't know,
And I
we've
would
just
rather
know
not
it.
see that. I would rather not see that.
So, in terms of the mitigation we're looking to impose through conditions, is there's, I understand it reports there's a landscape condition, but also within the ecology report, I think the representative for the applicant on site when we visited the site said that within the ecology report it talks about low-level maintenance, sort of hand tools, and that forms part of condition as well, that we're looking for those to be enforced.
So we do have a landscaping condition at number 8, so your point is... Mr. Graves, are you happy for that construction management plan condition to be added to the motion that you are now seconding?
Yeah, just remind me.
Well, there should be a construction management plan to cover the construction of the building.
Yeah, I'm happy for that to be added. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't going to speak on this. So, excuse me if I'm fumbling around, and I think I might have one of my how not to win friends and influence people moments. Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate the planning officer, the agent, whoever else was involved, the architects, on actually working together and coming back with a solution that found to come to this committee with a recommendation for approval. I think that shows that the system, shows how planning can work. As it happens, I quite like the original plan myself, but I'll keep quiet on that. I mean, what I would say is that I appreciate the concerns of disabled access, but as I think we said, it's the whole thing's built on a hill. With regard to the light pollution, I found this quite interesting because I think there's probably 30 windows in that building, but that's been dealt with as well. Again, so we are down to, if you look at the objections from, say, the Parish Council, we are actually down to just the landscape character, etc., and the visual amenity, and I think that problem has been solved, and probably the balance of what we're trying to do, and I can't remember the policy, but there is a policy that says, we're talking about ancillary service accommodation in an existing hotel. It's in there somewhere. It's exactly what we need to try and achieve. And one of the problems we all moan about in the park is how many Airbnbs we've got, how many houses being bought for second homes are being bought and sold as holiday lets. But actually, how do you counteract that? You provide more service accommodation in situations where there's already existing service accommodation, and I think this would make it 18 units. Personally, I think the sweet spots are always around 20, but that's a commercial decision made by the applicant. But I think it's the way that we should be looking forward to accommodation. And you also, I don't know whether I should start declaring an interest really somewhere along the line, bearing in mind what I also do for a living at some point. But I think one of the things that came up earlier today as well was the government's proposals for hotels and things. And of course, accommodation changes, traditional hotels change, traditional seaside guest houses change. People want to stay in different accommodation. And actually, this is, would you, if you're coming to Exmoor, actually, where do you want to stay? Do you want to stay in a guest house, or would you like to stay in a place that's got food, got an offering, and got different style of accommodation? And I think this is exactly what we should be supporting in the park. I think we've managed to mitigate any landscape harm that people may or may not be in. I think it's quite an intuitive design, not necessarily to my taste. I always look at that service station going up the M5 at Gloucester and think I expect Teletubbies to jump out at any moment in time. But I can see the need. I think it will be unique accommodation. I think the fact that they're obviously basically hotel bedrooms that are not attached to the building. They're not putting any kitchen equipment in there. I look at the conditions going later on, and There's one condition that I always thought was a little bit weird, the one about keeping a record of people who stayed there every time. That's probably, some of me thinks that's a bit onerous, but then actually in reality in today's world it's not onerous because you click a couple of buttons and the computer prints out a list. But I just think it's a touch on maybe control freakish, but that condition's in there. It's obviously been accepted. I understand why it's in there. So I'm more than happy to second the recommendation and wish them well and all the best of luck when they build it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I missed the site inspection. I think the first one I've ever missed, but I couldn't make it that day, so my apologies. I think I heard that the initial concerns from the future landscapes officer and the historic buildings officer have been overcome. And on that basis, I think very good points made in terms of access, inclusive access, but as I think Francis said, it's very difficult to achieve that in all circumstances, particularly with some of the older buildings and listed buildings as well. So I think given that the substantive planning concerns have been overcome, so to the credit of all concerned, it's been negotiated, and I cannot see any objections to the proposal on sound planning grounds. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Milton.
Nothing to add to the previous two. I'll only be re-saying it otherwise.
Thank you for that self-control. That was great. Are there any other members who wish to speak, please? If not, it has been moved by Mrs. Nicholson and seconded by Mr. Cravis with the addition of a construction management plan condition, which the officers will draft. But I think we're happy to allow them to do that. Yes.
Very sorry, Mr. Chairman, but on the site meeting, the question of foul water was mentioned. We haven't had a sort of fill-in of information about that at this time.
The agent has indicated that the foul sewage will drain into the existing septic tank. We have put a condition on here, bear with me, condition 9, that before the development progressed further than slab level, we would want full details of the drainage system, including details of the linkage to the existing system and full evidence of the capacity of the system.
That's absolutely fine. I just wanted to make sure all members have heard that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. May I see all those in favour, please? Okay. Those against? One against, and no one abstaining, I don't think. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That one stands approved. The next item is 610-23014, which you will find on page 27, and this is the Horse and Crook, 19 High Street, Dunster.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't declare this. I am obviously, just like to point out that I am actually ward councillor for Dunster. Don't know whether I should declare that or not, but okay, I won't then.
I don't think that's it's a standing interest that's declared. Okay, thank you. So this is going to be presented by Mr. Spears. Mr. Spears.
I'm the less agreeable half, Chairman.
You said that, Mr. Spears.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Property in question is a Grade 2 listed building, which is situated on the western side of the High Street in Dunster, quite near to the yarn market. I can just show you, here's the site, here's the yarn market here. It is within the conservation area. At present, part of the ground floor of the building, leading from the single front door, has an established use for retail sales, as was approved under a planning reference 36093 in 1956. Before then, the property appears to have been used in its entirety as a dwelling. The present proposal seeks a change of use of the ground floor of the building from retail use to a C3 residential use. the upper floors of the building already have C3 residential use. As will be noted in the relevant history section within the report, such a change of use has been applied for on a number of previous occasions and refused, generally due to a paucity of relevant information and insufficient marketing history. This present application seeks to address that matter. No physical changes to the fabric or structure of the property are proposed, and as such there is no requirement for listed building consent. I've referred to the previous applications which were refused. They refused due to not enough justification to support the change of use, and the proposal was therefore, on those occasions, contrary to policies HCD 19 and SED 2 of the Exmoor National Park local plan. The applicant has now marketed the site for employment uses for more than 12 months consecutively. The property has been advertised as a retail use and residential accommodation above at a realistic asking price value continuously since September 2020. Details of the level of marketing with evidence of same have been submitted with the application, and officers are satisfied that the evidence is sound. The operation of the current retail element cannot be operated independently from the residential use, as it is not accessible from anywhere but the one single door which you can see in that photograph there, and you can see on the plan there. The front door to the building serves both the shop and the residential accommodation at present. As such, officers will contend that sufficient levels of marketing have been carried out to prove there is no market demand for the property in its present circumstances, and that the principal development here is accepted in accordance with the policy. As will be seen from the photograph, the building does not have a traditional shop frontage, but instead presents a residential frontage. It should also be noted that there will be no physical changes to the building inside or out. Officers note the comments of the Parish Council, but will contend that due to the particular circumstances surrounding this property, and the fact that any application should be judged on its own merits, it is considered that no precedent would be set, and the loss of this very small retail unit would not result in a significant impact on the viability of the High Street. In conclusion, the proposal has shown by marketing and other measures that the retail space contained in this property is no longer a viable business option, and that the proposal is considered to comply with the local plan. As such, officers recommend that the application be approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spears. We have a public speaker, and that is Mr. Burton. Welcome, Mr. Burton. You'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak, and yes, the microphone is switched on at the top.
Is that on now? Thank you.
Yep.
Is the red light on the top? Flashing. Yes. Right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Burton.
Thank you. I've got some notes here. I'm not sure I'm going to use much of it because I just don't want to repeat what the officer has said. As you've heard, the building was originally designed as a dwelling. Suggested it may have been used as a public house at some point, but still has very much the appearance of a single dwelling and has the layout of a single dwelling. And that, I think that is significant in terms of the marketing, because it hasn't been possible to market the shop separately from the dwelling. It can only really be operated by the person that's resident there. I understand entirely that it is right that you have policies to protect retail uses wherever possible, but in this case your officers have ensured that the potential demand for any future retail use has been fully tested. As you've heard, we're now just on 3 years of marketing at a realistic price with the appropriate description, and that is way beyond what you would normally expect. In terms of your policies, and this is the 3rd application for change of use. So I have to say your officers have really put Abigail through the mill here to absolutely test that there is no demand for use for retail. So in light of that, it's understood why the parish council would prefer it to remain as a shop. I'm sure there's some good reasons why that was your policy. Encourages things to be retained wherever possible, but the market has demonstrated that that's not going to happen. So, if planning permission isn't granted, what will happen is that part of the building will remain empty. Because there isn't any other suitable use other than that, returning it to part of the single dwelling. I just want to be clear that we're not talking about an additional dwelling here. This is just incorporating it as living accommodation as a single dwelling, the building as a whole. So therefore, I say the alternative is that it remains empty. That's not in the interests of Dunster, and it's certainly not in the interests of the listed building. So on that basis, request that you grant planning permission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. Thank you. Right, we now move to member debate, and the first speaker is Mrs. Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A comment and a question. The comment is that I am aware, I have absolutely no interest in this, but I'm aware because I worked with the previous owner and occupant, and at that point, for some years, it was clearly not considered possible to run a retail business in there, and it was therefore empty. I don't think an empty space that looks grim in the middle of Dunster actually helps Dunster. That was the comment. The question was, there was in 1956 an approval to change the use of shop to living accommodation on the ground floor. That was in 2003. Was that this same space, or was it another part?
It was, sorry.
And if so, was that the death knell to it as a shop, basically?
It's difficult to actually say whether it would be the death knell to the shop. Unfortunately, the information we have, being over 20 years old, is a little.
There isn't any information on the website. The planning website is empty, which I worry about.
Yeah, I could find no further information on that, and the only condition that was put on that was that it would be the development would be carried out within 5 years. To be honest, I haven't brought this into the report as it stands now, because that was 20 years ago. We've obviously had our own local plan updated, I think, at least twice. We've also had the NPPF come in, so it's a very different policy position. As such, we've looked at it at the position it is now, rather than then. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's helpful. I was wondering whether it was the same bit or whether it was something different.
As far as I can ascertain, that was the case, but as you said, there's very little information on file.
And just as a rider in general, I'm worried about the absence of documents on the website.
This is perceived and understood, Mrs. Nicholson. Mr. Milton.
Thanks, Stephen. Quite clear that the applicants have complied entirely with the requirements of our local plan in marketing this, and as such, I'd like to move officer recommendation.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Do you wish to speak now, Mr. Gein, or reserve your right?
Yes, Chairman, just to say that, I mean, I understand the parish council's concerns, and obviously we won't support as much of retail in our towns and villages as we can, but this really is a case where I don't see any question that it won't work as retail. They've done everything they can to sell it, and the officers are quite right to recommend approval.
Thank you. Mrs. Chilcott.
Thank you. I do understand the feeling of Dunster Parish Council. I think the challenge in looking at this is how many other buildings in Dunster you could be possibly facing the same scenario. I think the other challenge with this is that once any kind of retail setting is not trading for a period of years, you have not got those trading figures to evidence to any new buyer the sort of potential that's there. So whilst I agree with the officer's comments, I just do have a concern that you wouldn't want to see this repeated over and over, because I think it could change greatly the dynamics of a really historic area that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Cravers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in danger of disagreeing with one of my parish councils on a planning issue, and that never ends well. It's interesting because when I was reading the papers yesterday, just to prove that I was reading them, and somebody looked over my shoulder and said, "The Horse and Cook, is that a pub in Dunster?" And ironically, I shop in Dunster. In fact, I got a birthday present there just a week or so ago for somebody. And I must admit, I always thought that, I can't recall that being a shop. And I've walked past there lots and lots of times. I think I've always thought it was a house already. I have some vague memories of it. The problem we've got, I suppose, is that loss of employment. But I think, as the officers pointed out, actually, if you can only run the shop if you live there, then actually you're not necessarily losing employment, because you're not actually gaining employment. It's sort of like how can you say it, one of those lifestyle businesses. So that's not necessarily strictly true. And I think, so that leaves us down to, I suppose, so that's sustainable employment. It looks down, you look at High Street as a whole, is it going to fundamentally affect the High Street and the look of the High Street? The vitality of the High Street? I don't think it does. I do understand the concerns of the Parish Council with regard to other units, but I think, as was described in the report, that it doesn't actually maybe lend itself to retail as well as other units in Dunster do. And bottom line is, we look at the application that's in front of us, not at applications that may follow or have been in the past. So on that one, I'm afraid I'm going to support the application. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cravers. Do any other members wish to speak, please? If not, it has been moved by Mr. Milton and seconded by Mr. Geen that we should accept the officer's recommendation of approval. May I see all those in favour, please? And that is passed in MCon. Thank you very much.
Chairman, can I ask to be excused on the next item, because I've got a very important phone call just about.
Okay, so we move on to page 37, and this is item 12.3, proposed erection of an agricultural building at Bryant's Hill, Brompton Regis, application number 6323007, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Rose.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this application at Bryant's Hill is seeking permission to establish an agricultural building that will be utilised in connection with the land owned by the applicant. The primary aim of this building is to provide necessary storage for machinery required for land maintenance, as well as a dedicated space for dry storage to accommodate agricultural needs such as hay storage as well. Another purpose of the proposed building is to create a facility for collecting and reusing rainwater on the site, which could reduce the need for transport for water from external sources to the site itself. So present here is a location plan. The application site is positioned on the eastern periphery of Brompton Regis, in direct proximity to the boundary of Bryant's Hill Highway. The site occupies the northern corner of the field within an expanse of agricultural land. This land is part of a larger collection of agricultural fields, comprising an estimated total area of 15 acres under the applicant's ownership. Here is an aerial plan that illustrates the access route to the site via an unpaved track and a field gate located off Bryant's Hill itself. The site itself consists mainly of coarse grassland and ruderal vegetation. To the north there is a hedge and a tree line serving as a boundary, whilst native hedges enclose the eastern side of the site as well. Here is an existing site and elevations plan, clearly indicating the current state of the area. Notably, there are no existing agricultural buildings within this space, and there is no indication of any prior construction of agricultural structures on this site. And the proposed site and elevations plan here outlines the intended changes. The dimensions of the building are set at 13.5 metres by 9.3 metres, and the proposed eave height reaches 4.7 metres, ensuring adequate clearance for tractors. The ridge of the building is planned to stand at 6 metres. Notably, both the north and west elevations are designed as open fronts, facilitating smooth entry and exit for vehicles, and in contrast, the east and south elevations will be clad in timber. To enhance site screening, a segment of beech hedge planting is proposed to the south of the site as well. So here are some photographs of the site, starting with the access from Bryant's Hill. Here is a view of the left-hand side of the proposed site, and to the right you can see the existing access from within the site onto Bryant's Hill. And here are some photos from within the site from south and west away from the proposed development site. So the main concerns of this application revolve around its compliance with planning policy, particularly in regard to the proposed location of the agricultural building. Whilst there are positive aspects such as the alignment with Exmoor's local plan policies on materials, applications for agricultural and forestry development must comply with policy SES4. In accordance with policy SES4, new agricultural buildings must be physically and functionally connected to existing structures related to the business, unless exceptional circumstances justify their isolated placement. The planning agent has considered factors like site access and topography, but hasn't convincingly demonstrated a compelling need for the barn itself and for its placement in that particular isolated area as required by the policy. Additionally, the information provided about the applicant's land ownership and farming operations lacks clarity, and the location plan provided only shows a small part of the owned land, making it hard to determine if this is the most suitable site. An updated plan was requested by the local planning authority, specifically showing the 15-acre ownership boundary, to assess if a better location could possibly exist, but unfortunately this request has not been fulfilled, leading the local planning authority to find the justification for the chosen site insufficient based on the available information to date. As such, taking into account the issues noted within the presentation and within the officer's report, it's concluded that the proposals are contrary to the policies outlined within the Exmoor National Park local plan. Whilst it is noted that the scheme will incorporate rainwater harvesting and include sustainable traditional materials, particularly the use of Waney Edge timber, these collectively are not considered to outweigh the concerns raised regarding the lack of information for the agricultural need for the building and its isolated location. As such, the case officer recommends that planning permission be refused in accordance with the reasons set out within the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. We have one public speaker, and that is the applicant, Mr. Luxton. So, Mr. Luxton, if you could come to the public speaking chair, please, and put the microphone on, and then you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Okay.
Thank you very
Firstly,
much.
I'm not the applicant. My mother is, but she's not able to come this afternoon. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I will be the third generation to farm in the Exmoor National Park from Oakway Farm, and hopefully my son George will be the fourth. The family's owned the 13 acres at Pullhamsville for the last 23 years and wish to build this shed to help keep our small farm sustainable in these uncertain times. we used to use, a lot of this has been covered, I didn't know what to expect. We used to use this building for the storage of animal food, handling and welfare of animals, and the catchment of water from the roof. So as it's been covered, we've got no water on site, which means we have to haul water with a tractor and bowser from our farm, which is a 5-mile round trip. Our water supply at the farm is poor, being on a 1960s spring, and struggles to cope with the demand when filling the bowser. Building this shed would allow us to harvest water from the roof and pipe it around the 3 fields we have at Plums Mill, allowing us to stock the ground in the summer, which we've struggled with in previous years. The site in question is in the corner of a field. It's got 2 established sheds around it. The site was levelled by the previous owners and has been stripped of any topsoil, so it's basically waste ground. It hardly grows any farmable grass at all. It's more like a roughy, weedy area. Where have I got to? So basically we're just trying to reduce our costs, storing food in the shed which is made from the land that we have there, so we're not taking it back to our farm and then bringing it back to that land to be fed in the winter. We don't like making silage, and we don't want to store silage on site outside. Obviously it's an eyesore. It creates a lot of ruts in the winter getting to the bales, mixing the subsoil and the topsoil, which is unreversible contamination. So the shed would allow us a dry, hard standing spot that we could feed animals from, making our handling of animals easier and our welfare, treating them on their own. Just to finish, I would have liked to be, well, my family would have been like to informed by the National Park about their visit on the 25th of July and invited to join the Conservation Officer and the Planning Officer on site to show them around the land further, and showed them what we had there. And just, this to me, this is ground which is unusable on our farm. It's level and it lends itself to a building, which is very rare in the National Park. I'd imagine that you get a level site where there is next to no groundworks to be done.
I don't know if you got to the end there, Mr. Luxon.
No, I didn't, but that's...
You had somewhat
no,
more than your
right.
2 minutes, but thank you very
Yep.
much. That's great, thank you. Right, thank you. Members. Dr. Kelly.
Yes, I guess I'm uncomfortable with this because of the lack of clarity, and it seems that the officers have tried to get this. If we start, as we all know, with the development plan, I'm just looking at policy SES4, and it does say proposals for new buildings in isolated locations in the open countryside will only be considered in exceptional circumstances relating to an overriding agricultural need, functional need. They should not replace existing buildings that have been subdivided away from the holding. That's what the policy states, so that's the starting point. And looking at the design and access statement that accompanies the application, it says the site has been separated from the applicant's agricultural holding, and therefore the new building would allow machinery and hay to be stored on the site rather than transportation from elsewhere. So I'm not clear whether this is new land that's been separated, what the separation is, and what the remainder of the holding is. Is this the information that we've been seeking?
I think that is exactly it. And as Mr. Luxon has said, it has been for some years in the ownership of his family. So clearly there is a long-standing use by this particular farmer of this land. Any clarity you can provide?
I'm not I'm not sure about clarity, but I think it's quite a useful opportunity just to set out that in terms of the issues and the policy considerations, Dr. Kelly's sort of highlighted those very clearly. I think it's worth establishing that officers throughout the process have tried to engage and tried to get the relevant information that we needed, and unfortunately for one reason or another we've not been able to achieve that. That's one of the reasons why we are before you now with the recommendation that we feel that we can't go any further. It is a case of not knowing is the issue in terms of that information, rather than necessarily saying that we would never be able to support a building on this holding. And I think once we were given that information, I think we could probably work with the applicant to either look to support the proposal and then come back, or that we would look at an alternative site and look to achieve the aims and objectives of the farm from that perspective. But because we've tried, as you can all appreciate, members, we do need to try and determine applications in a timely fashion, and this was a bit of a last resort. Thank you.
Dr. Kelly might be about to say the same thing I was
Yes,
saying.
indeed.
So I don't know.
I think so. Given the uncertainty, I'm uncomfortable about making a decision today, and I would move deferment of the
I
application.
was going actually to say something very similar. Are you happy to second
I'm very
that?
happy to say it.
Right. However, I'm sure you'll say this will mess our figures up.
It's not figure issues, members. It's apart from going back and asking again for, I think this will be the 4th time. I don't know what more we can do, and at what point do we say, do we come back and make a decision, because otherwise an application will be loitering. That doesn't help anybody, including the applicant.
I think, I'm afraid you can't come back, Mr. Luxton, but I have to say I think that with the collective voice of the committee today, sending a very strong, clear message to say we are prepared to defer it, but we do need this information so that we can conclude the matter. That might be sufficient to maybe get us to the point where we can finalise it.
Can we put a date on it? Yeah. Come back either next month or the month after? And it will be determined at that point.
On the basis of that, I'm more than happy to have a time frame on it. I think to provide the applicant and their agent sufficient time, it would be useful to maybe have 2 cycles. We will do everything we can to try and get it back within 1, but it does allow that flexibility, because otherwise the applicant's going to be in a difficult position where we'll be forced to bring it back to make a decision.
Right. It's been moved by Dr. Kelly and seconded by Ms. Davis that we should defer for 2 cycles.
At the latest.
At the latest. If we get the information in earlier that enables us to be able to bring this forward and to determine it quicker, well, so much the better. Is there any other view that members wish to express? If not, may I see all those in favour of deferral? Any against? Any abstentions? Right, so that will stand deferred for 2 cycles at the most. So at the latest, we will expect to see that one back in November. Okay? Right, but we hope that the information will be here then to enable us to be able to take that decision properly. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Luxton. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to item 12.4. This is listed building consent for proposed alterations to windows, roof, heating and electrical systems at Hillside House, 22 Watersmeet Road, Lynmouth, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Chair. This application, as was just pointed out, seeks listed building consent for alterations to existing property, Hillside House. Many of you will recall that an application for the retrospective change of use from a bed and breakfast to a principal residence was approved by this committee a few months ago. The reason that it is before members is it relates to a member of staff at the authority. In terms of the detailed breakdown of the proposal, members' attention is drawn to page 45 and 46, which goes through in some detail the changes that are proposed. By and large, the works that are proposed to the listed building seek to remove later additions to the property that are considered to have a harmful impact upon the original character and appearance of the listed building. The Historic Buildings Officer has been consulted and was engaged at pre-application stage, and overall it is considered that the proposed changes are acceptable. The application site lies within the village of Lynmouth, and the aerial image before you shows the location of the site along Watersmeet Road. The dwelling is in an elevated position from the roadside. My apologies for the size of this slide, members, because I don't believe for a moment you'll be able to pick out the detail, but those areas you can see in red largely show the proposed internal alterations, with the external alterations relating to the removal of existing oil tank, the repair to some steps, and paving, some changes to the render, general renovation of existing timber windows, removal of an existing UPVC window and replace that with a timber window, and remove the UPVC roof glazing and replace with a new double glazed system with a lead grey top capping, and then secondary glazing proposed throughout. So just some photographs of the application site. So this is taken from the opposite side of the road. You see the elevated location of the dwelling. This shows some of the areas external where some of the works are proposed, so the removal of the UPVC structures at the rear and the oil tank, which again I would confirm was considered a positive alteration. The existing patio and the UPVC windows that are to be removed from the rear of the property are shown on these slides. And just for some context, some historic fabric, but some potential changes to the floors internally. Overall, there are no objections to the proposed application, and consultees have raised no objection, subject to appropriate conditions that are listed on pages 51 of your report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We have no public speakers on this item. My first member to speak is Ms Davis.
Thank you. Well, these are positive changes, I would say. I'm surprised they put in the previous occupants, put in the UPVC windows, and probably there's a load of questions around how that happened, but that's not part of this application. I have actually been in this dwelling. I was looking at those photographs, so I feel I need to tell you that about 30 years ago I bought a Rayburn off some previous occupant. And that Rayburn is still working. Yes, very sustainable, yes. So I would like to move the recommendation. Thank you.
Is that seconded, please? Mr Yabsley, do you wish to speak, Mr Yabsley, at this stage? No. Does anybody else wish to speak? Mrs Chilcott?
Thank you. I was raising my hand to second, Chair, but I will say actually I really welcome this application. I think it's lovely when people want to, I'll call it sprucing up a property in a sympathetic way and actually enhancing it. I think it's really lovely to see, and I think it will really benefit the property moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak, please? If not, may I see all those in favour of approval? That is that is now NEMCOM. Thank you all very much.
Question now.
Yes.
I thought that there had been a change not all that long ago, which meant that only senior officers, we only had to bring to committee applications by senior officers. Did I dream that?
I'd never suggest you dreamt it, but I don't remember that change now.
I did do it.
Okay, we move on to application number 62/1923/002 LB, and this is listed building consent for proposed replacement of 5 timber sash windows at Verwell Farm, Combe Martin. And this is going to be presented by Mrs Shears.
Thank you. The application is brought before the committee because the applicant is a member of the authority. The application is for listed building consent for the replacement of 5 timber sash windows at Verwell Farm. The property is located to the east of Combe Martin. The property consists of a Grade 2 listed dwelling, which is the subject of this present application, and a range of traditional barns and modern agricultural equestrian buildings. The dwelling was previously renovated from a dilapidated condition between 1999 and 2001. This renovation included the complete replacement of the windows in the principal facade. There was no historic fabric left after that replacement. The windows replaced under the previous renovation are now in a poor condition, with the first floor windows being beyond repair and the ground floor windows showing signs of rot. The existing windows are not high quality and have modern float glass. And from the photo you can see these are the 5 windows that are proposed to be replaced. The proposed replacement windows will be of higher quality and will improve the thermal efficiency of the building. In addition, the historic fabric of the building will be protected from decay through water ingress. It is noted that the Historic Buildings Officer has raised no objection to the application, is not concerned with the removal of the existing modern windows, and considers that the proposed replacement windows would be in keeping with the building. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mrs. Spears. Again, no members of the public. Mr. Gregors.
I was going to move approval, bearing in mind the only reason this has come to this committee is probably because Dominic's on the committee, which opens up a whole different debate, another argument about why things come to committees, and because of course the next item again is a similar sort of one, so I'm more than happy to recommend approval.
Thank you. Is that seconded, please, by Mr. Holton? Do you wish to speak, Mr. Holton? Does anybody else wish to speak? May I see all those in favour? Again, Parson M. Con. Thank you very much. And our last application is on page 63. This is 6040-23007DC. Discharge of condition at the bridge below Great Bradley, Woodley.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep this very brief. This is relates to approval that this authority gave last year, beginning of this year, for the replacement of a bridge at Great Bradley, and a number of conditions were imposed. This application revolves around the discharge of condition 3, which was detailed the need for an environmental management plan to be submitted. Those details have now been considered. The Environment Agency have raised no comment, and the Wildlife Officer has also raised no objections to those details. It's considered that this complies and discharges the condition, and such approval is sought. Thank you.
Dr. Kelly?
I move approval, Chair.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
You might look this side occasionally.
Well, I haven't said who it's seconded by yet. Give me a chance. Mrs. Chilcott, shall we have you seconding this one? So, proposed by Dr. Kelly, seconded by Mrs. Chilcott. Do either of you wish to exercise your right to speak?
No, Chair.
You sure? Okay.
Absolutely, Chair.
Anybody else wish to speak? If not, yes, Mrs. Nicholson.
I was using my emails to try and check something on this application, and have failed to get there in time, so I'll ask the question. Is this the new bridge to go with the diverting the bridleway?
Yeah.
Why are we calling it a footbridge then? Because that was a problem in the notification of the footpath, the right-of-way change, because it was for use of horses as well as pedestrians, and the notice had to be sent out again. So I'm asking the same question here. Why are we calling it a footbridge and does it matter? If it doesn't matter, then let's not worry about it, but does it matter?
For planning purposes, it doesn't matter, but I will note it and make sure.
Yeah.
Right, can I see all those in favour, please? Them con, thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to the applications delegated to the Chief Executive, item 13, and we will now have our edited highlights from Mr Kinsella before we look at them page by page.
Thank you, Chair. So just going through page by page, just picking up those applications that have been withdrawn or refused. To start off on page 2, the very bottom item that moves over onto page 3 for Stanborough Cottage. The application was withdrawn, and that was because of further information was required, and it was going to take the applicant some time to get that information. We have actually just received a further application now which seeks to address some of those concerns, and hopefully we can work with the applicant to find a positive solution there. Again, on page 3, the third one down, Lower Kemmercup Farm. This revolved around a proposed first floor extension. The application cited in a number of extensions throughout its history, and so therefore the proposed first floor extension was considered to exceed that of the policy that sets out that only the dwelling should only be exceeded by about 35%. I think this was around 120% if we'd approved it, so unfortunately we had to refuse that application, and we wait to see if the applicant wishes to appeal. The next one below that, Hall Farm, this again was a refusal. It was a lawful development certificate. The application sought to confirm that no planning permission was required for the erection of the gates or means of enclosure. We assessed the application and came to the view that planning permission was required, so we refused that certificate, and we wait to see if a further application is submitted. On to page 4, and the third one down, Longmead House Hotel. This sought the replacement of some wooden sash windows with UPVC. The proposal was considered to be contrary to the local plan, and so therefore we've refused that application, and again it will be for the applicant to decide whether they wish to appeal that. The one below, Fern Cottage, which was again a lawful development certificate for the existing use of a hotel guest room as a dwelling house. We didn't have sufficient information to be able to demonstrate the requisite time period, and so during discussions it was decided by the applicant that though we withdraw that, we are going to have to consider how we take that forward, because it could potentially be an enforcement matter that we'll have to investigate, but we will talk to the applicant regarding that. And then further down, the Fernery. Basically, this is a relatively long-standing application that was withdrawn, and some of the concerns as we was waiting for some further information. During the time, the applicant, I think, just made the decision that they no longer required the extension, so they withdrew that application. And I think that is it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr Kinsella. We will, as usual, just go through it page by page in case members have any other issues they wish to raise. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. And page 5. Okay. Oh. And page 6. Mr Ellicott. Do you want to ask anything?
Others of these. I went like that.
Oh, I see.
Forgotten.
Okay, so if there's nothing else on that, then, ladies and gentlemen, Item 14, site visits. It looks as though we will be having a site visit on the 29th in the morning, in the northern part of the park. Yep. So if you could make a note that almost certainly will be a site visit on that morning, please. But we'll send you further details in due course. With that, I will close the planning part of the authority and give the chairman of the authority the opportunity to close the meeting as a whole formally.